All right, well, hi everyone, and welcome to our next installment of NU at Noon, the Biden presidency and the future of American politics. So our speaker today is Professor William Mayer, Professor of Political Science in the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. And Professor Mayer is no stranger to NU at Noon, having given presentations during each of the election cycles going back to the 2004 election, as far as I can tell. So I'm excited to welcome him back to NU at Noon, where he will share his thoughts and expertise on the future of American politics under the new administration. And just a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. This session is being recorded for those who are unable to attend, but also for all of you to be able to view again in the future. So anyone on the call does consent to this recording. And then please remember to just keep your phone or computer muted during the presentation. We will be doing questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to put any questions that you have into that chat box that's at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Professor Mayer.
Well, thank you very much. Great to, I really do look forward to these talks that I've given over the years. You probably can't see it, but I have on my Northeastern tie that I was given after one of these talks. I don't remember which one, and I continue to use it. Let me, well, I'm going to, I have some PowerPoint slides to show you, but let me begin. I suppose the most notable thing about Joe Biden has been president now for about 2.5 months. And I suppose the most noteworthy thing is that he has a very ambitious agenda. He has already passed COVID relief. He's recently introduced a major infrastructure bill, though it also includes a lot of non-infrastructure spending, but he also hopes to pass a Green New Deal or some kind of significant environmental legislation, an expansion of the Obama health care bill, a bill that would dramatically increase federal regulation of American elections, some kind of significant tax increase, immigration reform, gun control, law dealing with abortion, criminal justice reform, free community college, and the list goes on and on. The phrase you'll sometimes hear is that Biden hopes to be a transformative president, somebody who really changes the pattern of American politics, somebody in the same league with Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. Now, it's not entirely unusual for new presidents to have big plans. It is a bit unusual for a president who was definitely elected, but certainly not by a landslide majority, landslide margin, and who has such narrow majorities in Congress. And here I'm gonna, just to remind you, is this being shared? Don't know that I did. Oh, I apologize, I didn't. I know it, no, I didn't. Excuse me, you'd think I'd be a little better at this because I have to teach all my classes this way. I'm on campus, just in case you're curious, I'm on campus 2 days a week, but but most of my students are actually watching my lectures via Zoom or at home or back in their dorms or wherever. Well, anyway, just to remind you, this is the way the presidential election turned out. Biden did win the popular vote, but not overwhelmingly by any stretch. I mean, compare this to
I think we're not quite
say
seeing
Ronald
the
Reagan's
slide that you're
margin
talking
in 1984 or 1980.
Excuse
Or
me,
even
Professor.
Dwight Eisenhower's 2 victories. This is pretty narrow, won by about 4.5%. Same true in the electoral votes. Remember, you need 270 to win. He was above that, but not that far above it. What about Congress? Well, as you probably know, the Senate is split 50-50. That gives the Democrats control because in tie votes, the vice president breaks the tie, and the vice president is, of course, a Democrat. The House is currently 218 to 211 with 6 vacancies. If those vacancies got filled with the kinds of people who, the vacancies, if you're curious, are representatives who either died or resigned. In a couple of cases, they resigned in order to take positions in the new Biden administration. And so the Democrats have something like 200, will probably have about 222 seats with 218 necessary for a majority. So again, they've got a majority, but not that much of one. So Biden doesn't have a lot of votes to spare. Now, you may recall that Biden ran a campaign in which he, I mean, among other things, criticized Donald Trump for being a very divisive president, and particularly after, in the speech he gave after all the networks had declared him the winner, he promised that he would unite the country. I always thought that was a, I don't know, depending on your perspective, unwise or maybe even duplicitous promise. I don't think the country is there to be united. I'll explain that a little bit more. In any event, Biden, to his credit, is not sending out nasty tweets at 2 in the morning. He's not saying intemperate things about anybody who happens to annoy him for the moment. But neither does he seem to be reaching out across the aisle, which is at least, I think, what you might have assumed he would do, given a lot of what he said during the campaign. He hasn't modified or toned down any of his proposals so far in order to make them more acceptable to the Republican Party. To appreciate why, or at least one explanation as to why Biden is governing this way, and what likelihood he has of getting most of that ambitious agenda passed, I think it's helpful to talk about one of the most important changes in American politics that has occurred over the last 50 years, and that's what's called the polarization of American parties. You may have heard that phrase before. What does it mean? Well, one way of defining polarization is that it's an increased correlation, or an increased relationship between partisanship and ideology. If you go back to the 1950s and early 1960s, one of the leading complaints about American political parties is that they didn't seem to stand for much. There were lots of liberal Democrats, but there were also lots of moderate and conservative Democrats. Most Republicans were conservative, but again, there were a fair number of moderate and even liberal Republicans, most of the liberals being from the New England area. Let me show you, there's my slide on this. Here, let me do that just so you can see it a little better. Let me show you one way of measuring this. Some of you may have heard of a group called Americans for Democratic Action, which was, it was once regarded as perhaps the premier liberal group in America. It's not as famous today. It was founded in 1947 by a really stellar group of American liberals, including Eleanor Roosevelt and Hubert Humphrey, Walter Reuther, who you may know was then head of the Auto Workers Union, a great theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr. Anyway, Americans for Democratic Action felt that in a typical election, voters knew who was a Democrat and who was a Republican, because that was, of course, listed right on the ballot. But lots of voters didn't know if a candidate who was running for Congress was a liberal or a conservative. So they devised a way of trying to measure this. Every year since 1947, the Americans for Democratic Action board, they have a board of, I don't know, directors, identifies 20 key votes in both houses of Congress, 20 roll call votes that, in their opinion, were the most important votes taken that year. And for each vote, they identify what they think is the correct or liberal position on that issue. They give each representative or senator 5 points for every time they vote the liberal way. So the result is to create for each member of Congress what's sometimes called an ADA score or an ADA rating, ranging from 0 to 100. If you get a score of 100 or 90, it means you voted liberal most of the time. If you get an ADA score of 10 or 20, it means your voting score is pretty conservative. Now, I hope that doesn't confuse you. As I say, it just means that the ADA ratings provide a good measure of how liberal or conservative each representative or senator is. Now, a while back, for one of my classes, I took some of these ADA scores and kind of played around with them, examined them for 3 years. The first year I looked at was, let me show you this, 1963, which was kind of just before American politics really started to change in the way I'm going to talk about. And I think this picture here, or this graph, it's not a graph, excuse me, chart, table, tells you what I think confirms what I think most observers would have said about American politics back in 1963. There was quite a bit, as you can see, there was quite a bit of diversity in both parties. A small majority of Republicans, 56%, were, first of all, does everybody, I hope everybody can understand this chart. I took the ADA scores, as I said, which range from 0 to 100, and I figured if you get a score between 0 and 33, that means you're a conservative. I just divide them into thirds. So if you get a score of between 34 and 67, you're a moderate. And if you get a score of 67 to 100, you're liberal. Incidentally, if some of you think, well, this is just a liberal group doing it, somewhat later, a group called the American Conservative Union started to do the same thing, except of course for them, 100 meant conservative and vice versa. And the point is not the direction of the scale, but just what it says about a person's ideology. So as I was saying, in 1963, about a little more than half of Republicans were conservative, but notice that about a third of Republicans, this is in the Senate, by the way, were moderates, and 12% were actually liberals. On the Democratic side, again, about a little more than half of the Democratic senators were liberals, but a quarter of them were moderates, and fully 1 out of every 5 Democratic senators was a conservative. So what does it look like today? Well, here's the same data divided in the same way in 2012. I notice I'm getting one comment here on the chat line. Let me make sure. Let me see if it's something that I ought to answer right now. We will begin momentarily. All right, so I don't have to respond to that one. So this is the ADA scores in 2012. And pretty clearly, what you should note if you compare these two charts is the almost complete disappearance of moderates. As of 2012, there were no, at least by this measure, Democratic moderates, and a mere handful on the Republican Party. Virtually all Republican senators were conservative, and all Democratic senators were liberals. And if you think 2012 is an unusual year, here's 2016. A few more moderates, but again, almost all the Democrats are liberals and almost all the Republicans are conservatives. So that's what polarization looks like. As I say, it means that there aren't that many moderates and that virtually all Republican senators and representatives are very conservative. Virtually all Democratic senators and representatives are quite liberal. What does that mean in practical terms? Well, it means that it's very difficult and probably on some issues impossible to build coalitions across party lines. In other words, to produce a bill on some important issue that is acceptable to both Democrats and Republicans, and that therefore gets votes from both a substantial number of votes from both Democrats and Republicans. That wasn't always true. A good example of how Congress once operated is quite famous bill, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which, as you may know, some of you may remember its passage. It was really one of the two most significant civil rights actions taken since the end of Reconstruction, so since 1876. Very important bill, outlawed discrimination, racial discrimination in employment and hotels and restaurants and so forth. How did that bill get passed? The answer is that the Democratic president, Lyndon Johnson, at the time, worked very closely with the Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, particularly Everett Dirksen, who was the Republican majority, excuse me, the Republican majority leader in the Senate. And so when the bill was finally passed, you might notice, this is the vote, the final vote, a majority of Democrats in both the House and the Senate voted for it, but an even more significant Republican majority, an even larger Republican majority voted for it in both the House and the Senate. So it was a bipartisan coalition that passed this bill. Now, compare that vote to the vote. So does everybody, I hope it's clear what this table says, says that in the Senate, 46 Democrats voted for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, 21 voted against it. Among Republicans, 27 voted for it, 6 voted against it. Now, compare that to the vote for the Affordable Care Act, more popularly known as Obamacare. In both the House and the Senate, not a single Republican voted for it. In the Senate, every Democrat voted for it. In the House, there was a little bit of defection, but not much. What is that? Probably be about 85% of Democrats in the House voted for it. But again, as I say, not a single Republican voted for it. Now, lest you think only Democrats work that way, the same was true when the Republicans passed what was called the Tax Cuts and Job Act of 2017, or more popularly known as the Trump tax cut. Again, not a single Democrat in either the House or the Senate voted for it. Republicans overwhelmingly did vote for it. Now, what does that mean in terms of Joe Biden's agenda? Well, earlier I said that in spite of his promise to unite the country, and all the talk about how he seemed to get along with lots of Republicans, he hasn't done much by way of actually reaching across the aisle, actually trying to work with Republicans. Well, to be fair to Biden, these days, you could argue that there's not much point in reaching across that aisle, across the aisle, unless he wants to retract a lot of what he promised to do during the campaign on issues like the Green New Deal and infrastructure and abortion and so forth, unless he wants to change his mind on that or change his vote, he's not going to get a lot of Republican votes. People like Ted Cruz are not going to vote for the vast majority of the items on the Biden agenda, even if Biden were to try to negotiate with them, even if he was willing to tone down at least a little of his legislation. And again, that's not just a problem with Republicans. The same was true for Trump. No matter what he did, he wasn't going to win the votes of people like Elizabeth Markey and Elizabeth Warren or Ed Markey. That's what I meant to say. The good news for Biden is that the Democrats in both the House and the Senate are a very liberal group, and they're likely to be very supportive of his agenda. So even though he has pretty narrow majorities in both houses, he may actually get a fair amount of his legislation passed. Maybe. The sticking point for a lot of what he wants to do, the sticking point for most legislation these days, is in the US Senate. A key provision in the Constitution is the one that I'm showing you here on the slide. It's from Article 1, Section 5, and it says each house, meaning each house in the Congress, may determine the rules of its proceedings. What that apparently innocuous phrase means, or clause means, is that each house has quite a bit of discretion to set up the rules by which it does its business. It has quite a bit of discretion to set up those rules in just about any way it wants. I mean, there's a couple of provisions that say, for example, that you have to take a roll call vote if 1 out of every 10 members wants there to be a roll call vote. But by and large, houses, each house can do what it wants. And the houses have taken quite different paths in terms of the way they deal with what's called floor action, meaning just anything that takes place in front of the full House or the full Senate. As you may know, a lot of the actual work of Congress gets done in committees. If a representative or a senator were to introduce a bill yesterday or tomorrow into the House or the Senate, the first thing that would happen to it is it would get sent to a committee. And if the committee were at least favorably disposed towards the bill, what they would probably do is hold hearings on it and then what's called have a markup session, which means they would actually write a bill. And if the bill passed the committee, in the House, once a bill passed the committee and is awaiting a vote by the full House, it is first sent to the House Rules Committee, very important committee, which always has a majority for whatever party is in the majority in the House as a whole. The House Rules Committee's sole function is to devise a rule for each bill, specifying such things as what kinds of amendments are allowed, and most importantly, for present purposes, how much time will be allowed for debate. I notice I'm getting a question here. Let's see, what does it say? What happened to the idea of debating the pros and cons of any legislation Well, I'll come back to that, Gene. It's a good question. But anyway, every rule that the House puts out is, as I say, specifies how much time will be allowed for debate. So they might say on some particular bill, we will allow 12 hours for debate, and they usually divide it evenly between the different sides. So people in favor of the bill get 6 hours, people opposed to it get 6 hours. And after that debate time, those 12 hours are used up, the bill must be brought to a vote. You can't keep debating. Well, you could with the full consent of the House, but that's typically won't occur. So at the end of the debate time, usually a vote will be taken. By contrast, in the Senate, there is no Rules Committee. Instead, literally since 1807, there has been a tradition in the Senate of unlimited debate. Anytime a senator wants to say something more about a bill, he or she is allowed to do so. And again, since quite early in American politics, there has been the practice of what is known as filibustering. Filibuster is when one or more senators try to hold the floor and keep talking until finally the supporters of the bill say, "Okay, we got to move on. We will withdraw the bill," and then, of course, the person will stop talking and they'll go on to another topic or another issue. If any of you have seen a great movie called Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you may know that Jimmy Stewart sort of holds a one-man filibuster at one point. In 1917, as I indicate on the slide, the Senate finally said, well, this is enough. We're having, one person should not be allowed to delay the Senate in this way. So they passed a rule that says that debate can be shut off by invoking cloture. Originally, they said that it takes 66 votes to invoke cloture. Today, it requires 60 votes. Now, for quite a while, filibusters were really rather. The number of Southern senators tried to filibuster the civil rights laws in the 1950s and 60s, but as I say, filibusters were rare. They have now become incredibly common, and usually it is not a single senator that tries to filibuster a bill, but the whole party that is in the minority. So, for example, if one senator tries to filibuster a bill, well, there's a limit to how long one senator has the energy to filibuster. After 10, 15 hours, the senator's voice would give way, and their energy would start to flag, and so eventually they'd have to surrender the floor. Well, if you've got 45 or 48 Republicans or Democrats in the Senate, you can filibuster essentially for an unlimited time. One senator can get up and speak for an hour, and then when his voice starts to wear out, he can pass it over to some other senator, and you can keep doing it on and on and on. And that has become a kind of, excuse me, accepted way of doing business in the contemporary Senate. Reinstating, Gene again says, reinstating the talking filibuster seems a good idea too. The way now they can just send an email and they don't need to do the Mr. Smith is absurd. These guys love the press. I'll come back to the issue of reinstating the talking filibuster. Anyway, it is now pretty much a part of routine practice in the Senate that it requires 60 votes to pass most legislation, not 51 or 50 with plus a vice presidential vote, but 60 to shut off debate, and then 50 or 51 to actually pass the bill. Now, importantly for Joe Biden, there are two major exceptions to the practice of unlimited debates in the Senate. First is budget bills. In 1974, both houses of Congress rewrote the procedures that they used to pass budget bills, and in the Senate they specifically exempted budget bills from the filibuster rule. So you cannot filibuster a budget bill. Budget bill basically meaning any bill that allocates a significant amount of money or uh, deals with the tax code that cuts or raises taxes or something like that. So budget bills can't be filibustered. Also, and this is a much more recent development, votes on presidential nominations to either the House or nominations to either the executive branch or the judiciary cannot be filibustered. So uh, as I say, there are those two exceptions, but there's a whole lot of stuff Biden wants to do that does not fit into those exceptions. The Democratic agenda has already taken one significant hit in this regard. You may know, I mentioned earlier that you probably, you almost certainly uh, learned about it if you follow the news, that they passed a big COVID relief bill a couple of weeks back. When the House put that bill together, it originally included a provision for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which would be a very significant increase. It's only $7.25 per hour at the moment. But when it got to the Senate parliamentarian ruled that it wasn't a budget provision. It had no real relationship to the budget, and therefore it had to be, if it was left in the bill could have been filibustered. So the Democrats agreed to take it out, and then was strictly a budget bill, and then it merely required 50 or 51 votes to pass. So expect some parts of the Biden agenda to get stalled in the Senate. Now, let me address one of the questions Gene Ryder raised. Today, typically, when one party announces that it's filibustering, and I do want to emphasize here that this is, I mean, today, the party that's going to be filibustering are in the Senate are the Republicans. But whenever there's a Republican majority in the Senate, it is the Democrats who filibuster. This is not a one party does this and the other party doesn't. Both parties use the filibuster when they are in the minority in the Senate. Um, so the what was I going to say? The filibuster. What now today? If a party wants to filibuster, they typically don't have to do the Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith thing, where they talk for 18, 20 hours in a row. All they typically have to do is announce that they will filibuster, and then the majority party will use, or the party the majority party will uh, uh, say, okay, well, in that case, we'll withdraw the bill. Some people have said that that shouldn't be the case anymore. That if you want to filibuster, you should actually have to do a lot of talking. Um, That's actually been tried once by a Republican majority leader, and the Senate Democratic senators responded just as you might have thought, namely, but they said, "Okay, well, we're willing to talk then for as long as necessary." They talked, in fact, for about well, they talked all through the night, and finally, the Republicans changing to a talking filibuster really will change much. If you've got 50 Republican senators, which is the practice today, you can filibuster you can actually talk filibuster for a very long time if you want to. One person gets up and talks about it, well, you can talk about anything, but they can talk about the bill for an hour, and then he or she can hand it off to a different Republican senator. And when that senator gets tired, you can hand it off to a different one. And as I say, if you've got 50 Republican senators, you can do a lot of talking without straining anybody's voice or energy. So I'm not certain that going to a talking filibuster will change much. Now, one final point let me make about the Biden agenda and the state of American politics. If, excuse me, I don't know why my voice is straining here a little bit. One final point that I was going to say is, if Biden hopes to get a lot of his campaign promises turned into law, there's a pretty general consensus that he has to do it in the next 2 years. That is to say, in 2021 and 2022, actually, the next year and 9 months. Why? Because one of the most reliable regularities in American politics, one of the historical regularities that you really can count on almost every time, is that in midterm elections, the elections that are held in every 2 years, every 4 years, but they're held in between presidential elections. So 1998 and 2002 and 2006 and 2018 and so forth. In midterm elections, the party of the president almost always loses seats in the House of Representatives. The party of the president almost always loses seats in the House of Representatives. The only 3 exceptions to that pattern were in 1934, 1998, and 2002, when the president happened to be unusually popular. Given the precarious majority the Democrats hold in this House, remember, they're only about 4, to have a majority in the House, you need at least 218 votes. If all the vacancies that now exist were filled with, with people from the same party that created the vacancy, it's likely that the Democrats will hold about 222 seats. That's not that many. And so if they lose only about 5-10 seats in the House, which in historical terms is a fairly limited um, loss, the Republicans will have a majority in the House by 2023. There's a very good chance they will. And that, of course, means that the Biden agenda, or almost all of it, will be dead on arrival when it gets to the House. So expect the next year and 9 months to be very active and very contentious. Let me say one final thing about the position of the Republican Party in all this. I've been sort of concentrating on the Democrats and the Biden agenda. I think one of the big questions that another guy and I are actually editing a book on the topic is, where does the Republican Party go from here? And in particular, what do they do about Donald Trump, who's kind of, depending on your perspective, the elephant in the room, or the 800-pound gorilla in the room. I believe that Donald Trump imposed a significant electoral cost on the Republican Party. By that, I don't mean this is independent of what you think of his policies. I agreed with. I'm. Some of you may know I think the lone conservative in the Northeastern Political Science Department. I agreed with some of Trump's policies, disagreed with others, but regardless of what you think of his policies, it seems to me that the Republicans were really weighed down electorally by being the party of Trump. That was true most recently in those two Georgia Senate elections. I think the Republicans would have won those elections if Donald Trump hadn't gone down there and tried to make them a referendum on him and on whether or not the 2020 election had been stolen. So I think a big question hanging over the 2022 elections is, what is the Republican Party going to do about Donald Trump? They will be lucky if he kind of disappears for a couple of years. I don't think that's going to occur. But running as the party of Trump is not a good strategy for them. If I were a Republican running in a competitive district, I might not go out of my way to say, to say nasty things about Trump, but I sure wouldn't say good things about him. I sure wouldn't invite him to campaign for me. Now that's, that may get more difficult if you're, because I think the Democrats understand this, and they will force or try to force the Republican candidates to say what they think about Trump. It's unclear, how that will play out. But I think for a Republican representative or senatorial candidate in 2022, positioning yourself vis-a-vis Trump is going to be one of the big challenges, one of the big obstacles to Republicans doing well in the 2022 midterms. Let me look at one. Oh, okay. That was actually just saying, feel free to drop questions in the general chat. So that's all of what I had to say by way of, my introductory remarks. Can I take any questions?
Yes, please.
Anybody?
If anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the general chat box, and I can I can read them aloud. Or if you sent
Sounds
some,
like a.
if you
I
sent
can't
some
believe
directly,
I solved all your problems or didn't say something that somebody would disagree with or agree with. Anybody?
give folks a few minutes to type anything out.
Lindsey Graham is reported to have said, without Trump, we've got nothing. I disagree with that. There was a Republican Party, a quite large Republican Party before Trump showed up. There will be a quite large Republican Party if he disappears, is physically incapacitated, if he's sent to prison, whatever. There will still be a very large Republican Party. Trump may have, it is where, if you want to get a sense of of Trump's, of what Trump did to the Republican Party, all you have to do is compare what the Republican Party looked like in 2016 to what it looks like today. As of, let's say, mid 2016, the Republicans had majorities in both the House and the Senate. They don't anymore. As of early as of mid-2016, if the Republicans had had anybody as their presidential candidate besides Donald Trump, that candidate would have stood a good chance of beating Hillary Clinton, not just in the electoral vote, but in the popular vote. So I think to say that other, I mean, there are a lot of pro-Trump Republicans. That's undoubtedly true. But I think the vast majority of those people would be Republicans, even if Trump, disappears. Now, what, if you are somebody like, say, Mitt Romney, who has demonstrated a real dislike for Trump and voted against him on a number of occasions, you may face a little bit of backlash in the next Republican primary. But I think most of the people who might not vote for you in the primary will end up voting for you in the general election. I saw a couple other questions here. What's your take on the Democrats ending the filibuster? I don't think they'll do it, is perhaps the first big point. It's a good question, though. Why? It would actually only take a majority vote to end the filibuster. So 51 votes or 50. But I don't think it'll happen. Now, why not? I mean, one is that there is kind of this long tradition of, of having the filibuster. But the other point is that if the Democrats were to eliminate the filibuster now, it might help the Biden agenda over the next 2 years, but it might really come back to haunt the Democrats in some future time when the Republicans have the majority in the House. I mentioned that one of the two big exceptions to the filibuster practice involves judicial nominations and executive branch nominations. That exception actually only dates to 2016. In 2016, Republicans were filibustering a number of President Obama's nominations, and the Senate Majority Leader at the time, a Democrat named Harry Reid, said, well, this is ridiculous. Let's get rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations. And in particular, he said, well, okay, the filibuster is generally the case, but the Constitution says that we only have that nominations can only need only a majority to be approved. So the filibuster is kind of unconstitutional in that circumstance, and he got enough of the Democrats to agree. So the result was that the Democrats got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominations. Now, what happened? Well, starting in 2014, the Democrats lost their Senate majority. And once Donald Trump got elected, Mitch McConnell, who was now the Senate Majority Leader and a Republican, took the Reid practice and really used it to add a whole lot of Republican judges, including 3 new nominees to the Republican Supreme Court, to 3 new Republican nominees to the Supreme Court. And I think a lot of Democrats learned from that. It might be nice to eliminate the filibuster now, but it would come back to haunt us the next time there's a Republican majority in the Senate and a Republican president. So I think they're going to be a little gun shy about eliminating the filibuster. They may try to limit it, to pare it back a little bit in some ways. We'll see. It's not clear to me exactly what you do, but that's about as far as I can imagine them doing it. Let's see, what else is it says? What about the possibility of a limited talking filibuster? Perhaps the rule of no more than 5 or 10 people could be chosen to speak. Well, as I say, any rule like that is effectively a way of ending the filibuster. And I think the Democrats don't want to do it because, as I said, it's going to, it might come back to haunt them in some future Senate. I mean, if they try to modify it, they're going to want to modify it in a way that doesn't really preclude it in a lot of future circumstances. At least that would be my guess. So let's see here now. Hold on. Seems to me that the Republicans have two problems in the midterm elections: Donald Trump and the fact that they don't stand for anything except saying no to democratic ideas. Do you agree? No, I don't agree. I think there is a Republican platform. I think Trump was not a good spokesperson for it because he had very little idea of, he was not well versed on a lot of policy questions. But I mean, it may not be quite as what's the word I want? Aggressive, ambitious as the Biden agenda. But of course, if Biden has his way, then the Republicans will have an agenda of getting rid of a lot of what Biden tried to do. Excuse me. But I think Republicans do have something of an agenda. At some level, it may be less ambitious than the Democratic agenda, simply because they are not a party of activism for the they are not the party of government, if you will, whereas the Democrats are. How much power do speakers and majority leaders have over the congressional members? Some, but not a great deal. They can have some power in, for example, giving. They have some power over what committee assignments various members get. They can decide about whether or not to bring a particular bill to the floor. The problem in the Senate, some senators might say, well, gee, so much of the Democratic agenda seems to be held up by Joe Manchin. You may know is one of the few Democratic moderates in the Senate today, senator from West Virginia. And he's going to be a major player in the Senate for the next 2 years because they only have 50 votes, which means they've pretty much got to make sure that that all 50 Democrats vote in favor of something in order to pass it. So if Manchin says no, I don't like this particular provision in the bill, not a whole lot they can do except, okay, we'll drop it, or maybe negotiate with him and say, okay, if will you accept this if we add something else? You may say, well, why not say why not read the Riot Act to Manchin? Why not say to him, listen, you vote for our bills, or we'll take away your committee your good committee assignments and put you on really bad, uninteresting committees, or we'll refuse to bring your bill to the House or something like that, to the floor. The answer is, if you tried to do that, one thing Manchin might do is switch parties. This is what actually happened to to the Republicans early in George W. Bush's presidency. Uh, in When George W. Bush first took office in 2001, the Senate was once again split 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans. And Republicans started organizing the Senate. But one of the kind of recalcitrant votes was a guy named Jim Jeffords, who was a fairly moderate, if not liberal, senator from Vermont. And the Republicans in the presidential advisors decided to kind of play hardball with him. And for example, one of the things that they did, the teacher of the year, I don't know who it is that designates this, but some group picks out one uh, teacher, elementary or secondary teacher in the country, and designates them as the teacher of the year. Well, the teacher of the year in 2001, or maybe it covered 2002, was a teacher from Vermont. And the Republicans, in trying to play hardball, said, well, we're just not going to invite Jim Jeffords to the White House ceremony for this person. So what did Jeffords do? He switched parties. Actually, he declared himself an independent, but said he would caucus with the Democrats. And the result was that the Democrats, or the Republicans, suddenly lost their majority in the Senate. And for the next year and a half, it was the Democrats that had a Senate majority. So there's there's not a lot that the speaker or the majority leader can do by way of punishing their members who are more moderate. Um, uh, they're kind of stuck with them these days. Who will be the leading Republican challenge? This is from Brian. Who will be the leading Republican challengers for president in 2024? That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have an answer. One, again, one of the big questions is, what will Trump do? If Trump gets in, and certainly at the moment, I think he's probably got the idea that he's going to run again, though you never quite know with Trump. If he gets in, I don't expect a whole lot of other candidates to get in, but some will. Ben Sasse, who's the U.S. Senator from Nebraska, almost certainly will get into, will run even if it's against Trump. And maybe a couple of other people will as well. If Trump gets out of it, then I expect that much like in 2016, we'll see a huge field of Republican contenders. I would expect that Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, will get in. I think that Tom Cotton, who's the U.S. senator from Arkansas, and I think a quite formidable person in a number of ways, I think he'll get in. I got a email from a friend of mine who's a very good political reporter, who said that Mike Pompeo, who you may remember used to be Secretary of State, Pompeo is now going around speaking in New Hampshire and Iowa. Well, that's a good, with all due respect to New Hampshire and Iowa, they're not sufficiently interesting as vacation sites that you'd go there or just there because you like the scenery or they have good amusement parks. You go there to campaign for president, and that's what Pompeo's doing. Who knows if he'll announce? If Donald Trump doesn't announce, it won't entirely surprise me if one of his kids tries running for president. So I think there could be a very wide open, very competitive race. Marguerite says, it seems that Mitch McConnell has power to not bring a bill to a vote in the Senate, effectively killing it. Seems worse than a filibuster in terms of obstructing the other party's agenda. If McConnell has 40 senators behind him, I mean, he can't do it on his own. If McConnell said, I want to filibuster this bill, and say half of the Republicans in the Senate said, no, we don't want to filibuster this bill, McConnell couldn't do it. McConnell can filibuster a bill only with the cooperation of most of the Republican members of Congress, which he has on a great number of these issues, a great number of the bills that Biden will try to pass. Seems worse that a filibuster obstructs the other party's agenda. Yes, as I said, the Democrats have long done this, did this quite regularly when Republicans had the presidency and a majority in the Senate, which they did, for example, in 2017 and 2018. So if you want to, you want to think about the filibuster and ways to change it, what you really do have to remember is both parties use it, and any change that advantages the Democrat, anything you don't like that the Republicans are doing now, the Democrats did at some point in the very recent past. And anything you'd like to see changed to help the Democrats now would help the Republicans as soon as they regain the presidency and a majority in the Senate. So, you know, it's it's a tough nut to crack, put it that way. I think the Republicans are gonna and that's why I said I don't think the filibuster will be eliminated in any kind of significant way. They may whittle around the edges, but that's probably about all they're going to do. Any, excuse me, any further questions?
I think that looks like all the questions in the chat box, and we are just a little bit past 1 o'clock, so I think
Okay.
that's perfect timing.
Oh, good. Okay.
Just want to thank you so much for presenting today. It was very informative. I think we all learned a lot, and there's a lot to think about, in the future of our politics. And so, just thank you again for being here with us today.
Well, I appreciate your having me, and I hope you'll have me back when we can actually do this in person. And because I always enjoyed seeing everybody in person and being able to chat with you after the talk. So hopefully in maybe after the 2022 elections or 2024 you'll have me back. But
Yes,
I really
definitely
enjoy
will.
this, and I hope everybody has a great day.